Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, lessons from the study of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis of blessed memory, a podcast addressing today's trends and headlines through interviews and conversations with Jewish leaders, inspired by the works of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis that make Jewish wisdom more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to today's complicated world. Hi, this is Mayim Bialik. My Jewish identity is a primary driver of everything I do and a defining quality of everything I am in this world. I was lucky to have learned many things from the late Rabbi Harold Schulweis while I was growing up in Los Angeles and during my time at UCLA. He shaped the way I think about our responsibility to each other, as well as the critical need for compassion as a foundation of our Jewish and human identity. Our guests share their Jewish journeys and discuss how Rabbi Schulweis's wisdom provides inspiration and guidance to us today. Hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach, Senior Rabbi at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California, and board member of the Harold M. Schulweis Institute, an affiliate of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California.
So excited today to be joined by Rabbi Lizzi Heydemann of Mishkan in Chicago. Lizzi, it's so good to see you on here and to talk to you. Before we begin, I have this copy of this magazine behind me that says it's a Los Angeles Times magazine from 1998. And it says Harold Schulweis wants nothing less than a revitalized Judaism. His methodology, challenge, question, and build bridges. And I'm sure that every good rabbi has a copy of this 20-something-year-old magazine in their office. But it makes me think of you and how you are and how you challenge and question and build bridges and how you're rethinking the rabbinate. How did you become a rabbi?
Thank you. I sadly don't have that article on a very prominent place on my bookshelf like you do. But I think something that's been said about Rabbi Schulweis, and certainly that sounds true from even just what you just read, is that he was ahead of his time. You know, he very much came up like in the midst of maybe the heyday of the movements. And I feel like I am a product of my time. I think he was ahead of his time, but I feel like I'm a product of my time. So I will describe to you kind of how I became a rabbi and how I am doing what I'm doing now. I grew up in what I would call a thriving Reform synagogue on the south side of Chicago, which of course I didn't know what to compare it to at the time. I just grew up with who I later learned were giants of the Reform movement as my rabbis and cantors, you know. So Rabbi Arnold Jacob Wolf, who was, I think, a contemporary of Rabbi Schulweis, probably in terms of age and generation, but he was an intellectual giant of the Reform movement. I grew up with Max Janowski as the cantor that was, sort of ending his career as I was beginning to grow up in that synagogue. And then finally, my song leader, the person who did song leading for my religious school and then who taught me how to be a song leader to replace him when he got his PhD and moved on outside of Chicago. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, University of Chicago campus. A lot of the teachers and leaders in the community were University of Chicago people. So it was a guy named Andrew Rayfeld, who is now Dr. Andy Rayfeld, who runs the Reform School in New York. He's the chancellor of HUC-JIR in New York. Like, the synagogue was always a very bustling place, and it was always a very intellectually rich place. And I grew up understanding that that's what Judaism was. And it was a place where you did argue with the rabbi, and the rabbi did say controversial things. And, he was I feel like he was a little bit like Howard Stern, like the way people talk about, you either love him or you hate him, but you tune into him. Like when his show was just hitting the airwaves, people, it was standing room only, at high holidays back in the day. And I think people wanted that. People showed up for that. That was the synagogue of my upbringing. Ultimately, I went into the conservative community that felt uplifting and inspiring, and did that in the conservative movement intellectually, but ultimately found my kind of spiritual crucible at ICAR, which, is a synagogue in Los Angeles that was founded, I believe, in 2004. And that's where I had my first job as a rabbi.
You were at ICAR near the beginning. How did you hear about ICAR, this brand new community? And also, maybe related, how did a product of the Reform movement like you end up at Ziegler, a conservative school?
I remember when I was graduating, I graduated from Stanford in 2004, and the Hillel rabbi who I started talking about the idea of maybe doing rabbinical school, maybe going to rabbinical school, was Rabbi Noah Kushner, who now is the rabbi at the kitchen in San Francisco. So I just had like all of these personalities and people kind of populating my path who now have become leaders in experimental, outside of the box, boundary pushing Judaism. So she told me that if I were to go to LA, I should look out for IKAR, because it was 2004. She said, I hear there's this thing that's getting started. She had a mutual friend, Daniel Sokach, who now runs the New Israel Fund, but at the time was running the Progressive Jewish Alliance down in LA, which shared a building, an office space with IKAR. And she said, like, you should look out for these people. But it was already, I was beginning to think LA was where I was going to go. And I was going to go there because Judaism in California felt a little looser and more kind of fun and experimental to me. All the other rabbinical schools are on the East Coast. And then finally, I did have a conversation with Rabbi Brad Artson the summer of 2004. I had just graduated from college.
I'm thinking about the words that Rabbi Artson said to you at Camp Ramah, that if you could do anything else, don't be a rabbi.
I was one of those counselors who was deeply searching. And I went to one of his classes. We had a long conversation about rabbinical school. And I remember him saying, if you can see yourself doing anything else other than being a rabbi, do that. He said, this is a job for, basically the people who feel called and committed in a way that no other vocation will allow you, to be. And like, it is unique. It is hard. And if you could do something else, go do something else. But ultimately, I did feel called. And so he was also the right, the right leader of the school for me at that time. I'd been on retreats. Not everything in a synagogue is that frontal experience. Sometimes it is. I feel like the high holidays are. But many other experiences are much more integrated and horizontal and, ask something of the community, or not just, basically saying to the community, here, we've got it, let us perform Judaism for you, but rather invite the community into a communal experience, whether it is learning, whether it is singing. So I feel like I felt that both in my synagogue growing up and also in many other environments. So getting to IKAR, I think what was revelatory was, at a certain point, I sat behind the Chazan, I sat behind Hillel, and he turned around and said to me, I want you on our davening team. And that was, I think, my fourth year of school. I had returned from my year in Israel, and that happened. And so I became part of that davening team as a rabbinical student, which helped me then understand kind of how this experience functioned. And that for me was, I would say, a formative part of helping create and design the way that Mishkan's davening team now works.
You must have people you've inspired to pursue their careers as rabbis. Would you urge them to go into the rabbinate, or like Artson, to avoid it? Aren't we facing a leadership shortage right now?
I was just on a panel recently, and someone on the panel said that the rabbinic pipeline shortage is the single greatest threat facing the liberal Jewish community in America. It's because it's not happening, it's not happening in the Orthodox world. There are plenty of rabbis in the Orthodox world, and they're growing. So really, we're talking about a liberal Jewish crisis. And then somebody else on the panel said, there is no shortage of prospective rabbinical students. There's just a shortage of rabbis. And so then the conversation was like, why is this happening and what's that about? And, my hypothesis is that many prospective rabbis wonder if they will be able to be themselves when they get into the job, if they will, go to school for 5 years and then end up in a space where they will ultimately feel constrained by community instead of in service of community. And that idea of being constrained in ways that, everybody has job constraints, that sort of limit and shape the way that we can lead. But that right now, my hypothesis is that people wonder whether they will be able to do what you want to do in your shul in the suburbs successfully. And at this point, I'm thrilled when people tell me they want to be rabbis. I try and help them find the right school that feels like it fits their priorities, curiosities, interests, the way that they practice Judaism and the things they want to learn. And I remind everybody that not everyone has the freedom to create something new around your ideas and vision. Not everybody has the financial security to be able to do that. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you about how that worked for me. Sharon Brous has her own story. Rabbi Noah Kushner has her own story. David Ingberg has his own story. Ultimately, everybody has to figure it out. And for some people, they're doing it from within a synagogue, from within an existing institution. And I think for anybody going into rabbinical school, that's a reality you want to prepare for, and that could be incredibly satisfying, but hard, but hard.
The pulpit, at least the pulpit that I have, is a bit limiting in what you can say. I think back to my teacher, Rabbi Schulweis, who said brave and unpopular things on the bima. Is there a political line in the community that you created that you can cross?
Right. Let's just go there. It's not about abortion. It's not about gun control. It's not even about immigration right now. These are all things that are live conversations on the American political scene. But right now, and I think in general, for rabbis, the do or die, make or break, knife's edge issue is how we talk about Israel.
Well, is it different since you created this community and got your people to join? You attracted like-minded people. You brought in your own.
From Mishkan's founding, from, our first service, I was aware of the breadth of political difference in the room on this issue. Just on this issue, but also we weren't creating Mishkan to be a space for exclusively radical politics or exclusively Zionist politics. We were creating a space for joy. We were creating a space for rediscovering what makes Judaism come alive, feel resonant, harmonious, create services that could be worship experiences where people would actually feel a taste of the divine, and I think me and all the other emergent rabbis talk about this slightly differently. But in my case, I've got a guitar here. Part of the way that I lead is this sort of, I would say, a seamless kind of musical, spiritual journey and experience that people come in on a Friday night or on a Saturday morning, and we are giving permission for people to become present, to let their hair down, to relax into a tradition whose words they may not know, whose tunes may not be familiar, whose language may feel archaic and alienating, and to still say, there is a place for you here. And we're going to show you. We're not just going to tell you that place exists. We're going to create the on-ramp in this experience right now so that you can feel it. And, and that includes a lot of yai-dai-dying. That includes a lot of things that make the experience of connecting plausible. And so as you can imagine, that's really attractive to a bunch of really different kinds of people with very different Jewish commitments. Israel is one of those, from what I can, my experience, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing. It is a qualitatively different issue. It is not just a political issue. It is an identity issue. It's a survival issue. It's a family issue. And so, I take very seriously how sensitive we have to be when talking about it. We can't be cavalier. And the bigger the community gets, it's not about donors, but it is about people feeling a stake in the community and not wanting to feel alienated by, and now the rabbis just said something that has cut right at the core of my identity. I would never do that on so many things. So on this, I really do need to be cautious and careful, and probably in slightly different ways than every rabbi needs to be thoughtful about how they talk.
Yes, right. I think about this with all these emergent network communities, Ikar and The Kitchen and Romamu. Why did you create something new?
One reason, ultimately, I had a great job at Ikar. I even had I had a 2-year contract, and I didn't finish the contract. I left after a year, and it wasn't because I hated it. I loved it. But the problem was I was feeling within myself a need to kind of express my rabbinic voice and leadership in a way that was almost like bursting out of me. And the place for that was not going to be LA, obviously. LA has an amazing community, multiple of emergent communities, of which Ikar is a leader. And I knew it was going to be Chicago. So knowing that, But being in LA, I started making phone calls to friends who were back home here and just asking them, like people I had grown up with, what do you do like for your Jewish spiritual life? And almost to a person, they didn't even know what to do with the question. Like, here I have this robust spiritual life that I'm living out at IKAR, and I'm a rabbi, but there are lots of young people who are involved and they're coming, and clearly there's a need there to be filled. And so I'm calling my friends in Chicago, asking them, how do you slake that thirst? And they literally don't even understand the question because no one has taught them as Jews, you are entitled to this. You get to have this. And like, they were like, well, of course, obviously one day when I have children, I'll bring them to, but why would I do that now? And so I understood my mandate to be an audience of people just like me who didn't go to rabbinical school, just like me who, grew up here in this city, who have a kind of Midwestern ethos about them, Midwestern sensibility, maybe never left the Midwest, maybe came back, and are looking for that same uplifting way into a Jewish spiritual life. And so that was like the community I understood that I was interested in cultivating, and for where there was a need and an appetite. Most young adults are not affiliated with synagogues. They're not affiliated with anything. And at the time, I think it was even more so. One table didn't exist. There was like Birthright Next, but that was sort of like, it was kind of sputtering. And so it was just clear that there was a big wide open space for young adults. So that was one piece. I had been trained in community organizing at IKAR for social justice purposes, but I understood that training and that approach of helping individuals, atomized individuals, come together to form a kind of common struggle, for an outcome that would make their lives better, that I could actually help birth that with a spiritual community. And then finally, I think this is a really important piece. There was failure at the center of this too. I had applied for a job in Chicago that I really wanted at a large conservative synagogue here. And ultimately they did not hire me. And I was devastated. I was really, really sad about it. And the rabbi there, Michael Siegel, who I will, remain indebted to, called me when telling me I didn't get the job to say, I'm sorry. I would have loved for you to have been our pick. It wasn't the right time. It might be too early. I don't know if we're ready for somebody like you. All the things, that I'm like, yeah. Okay. But he said to me, save my cell phone number in your phone. If you ever come to Chicago, I would love to help you. Let me introduce you to people. I might know funders who could help you if you want to do something. We certainly could, host you and give you free space here on a Friday night, or if you need an office or something. And in those first couple of years, before we had our own 501c3 organization that people could donate to us, people donated to Anshe Emet Synagogue and wrote Mishkan in the subject line, and their bookkeeper just kept a separate little account for us. And so that was just incredibly generous. And I think an example of the best of Midwestern, that like Midwestern kind of ethos of, we don't want to fight with each other. We'd rather get along. How can we get along?
That's an amazing story. I love it. It reminds me of this mythical story of Rabbi Schulweis and Browse. The version of the story that I heard, which is midrash, who knows what the real truth of it is maybe Sharon Brous, the great Rabbi Sharon Brous of IKAR. Before IKAR, she moved out to LA and wanted to be a rabbi at a synagogue and applied to the job at Valley Beth Shalom. And after learning with Rabbi Schulweis and talking to him, he said something like, get out of my office. You don't belong in the Valley. Go to the city and find your people, which is a very pro-Schulweis and pro-Brous. I don't know if that's the real story, though.
The way that Rabbi Brous tells that story is he didn't just say to her, go forth to the young people. He stood up and he banged on his desk and he yelled at her, get out of my office, go. And but of course she was devastated because she thought, all I want is to work for this great luminary of the generation. But she later understood he knew actually what was best for this generation, and it wasn't for her to be at VBS.
I can't imagine yelling at some up-and-coming rabbi to get out of my office. I mean, what chutzpah.
Right, exactly. And you bang on the desk and stand up. Except you're about half as tall as he was, right?
I think the bima was very high up, so he looked more imposing. I don't know. What were obstacles you faced in creating Mishkan?
I mean, at the beginning, to be honest, people were very grateful. And when I say people, I mean leaders in the community. Because I had heard, I'd heard from Rabbi Brous, I'd certainly heard from Noah Kushner, that starting something in a city that already has established legacy organizations is not easy. People will fight you. People will slander you. People will say mean things about you. People will try to shut you down. And, you just can't let the haters hate and get to you. And so I had heard that from them. And I knew that to be true. I saw and heard some of that because I started rabbinical school in 2005. And, that was really at the beginnings of IKAR. Can I say, I went around from rabbi to rabbi, from person to person, who was in a position of power, authority, leadership in Chicago, to introduce myself and to say, here's what I'm thinking about. I was quite transparent, actually. I wasn't, I'm not interested in stealing your members because your members, they're happy. They've got you. There is something like 80% of the Chicago Jewish community that we know to be unaffiliated. I'm interested in them. And I'm interested in the young adults who, don't, really bring in money for the synagogue anyway. And they're great, the hardest thing for synagogues to do is young adult programming because they're how much of this can we do before it's it isn't bringing in money, but it is a good investment. We know it's important, but also, we kind of have all, the care and feeding of the whole big community to worry about. So you want to do young adult stuff? God bless. Can we give you space? So that was where it started. And Mishkan, because we did not have a space, of course, we named the community, the traveling tabernacle. It does not have its own space. It travels from space to space. And wherever we go, that is where the divine presence shows up with us. So we had services at Anshe Yemet once a month. We had services at Temple Sholem. Really, every single week we met was a different location, which was crazy. But people followed us. It was like a pop-up supper club. We had an art studio that we often would go to. During the summer months, we'd go to the beach.
Are you still traveling or are you more settled now?
Eventually, we sort of settled into patterns of, this Unitarian church and, this space here. And the more stuff we accumulated, the more prayer books and the Torah and the Ark and, this sign and then the Tupperwares we needed to put the plates and the cups in. And I mean, truly, when you start to actually think about what a community needs to function, it's a lot of crap. And so when you read the, many, many, many chapters throughout Exodus of all of the implements that were part of the transporting of the Mishkan that are so boring, but then you understand if you are actually creating a traveling community, you got a ton of crap to lug around and you need to have lists of it so you don't forget any. It needs to have you need to know who's carrying it. It all actually really resonates now I read back. It doesn't make that stuff more fun to read, to be honest, but somebody needs to think about those things. Yes. And so, just to give you a picture of what it looks like now, we do have an office space. We do have a space where we work out of. We have 17 full-time staff and about as many part-time staff. And we work out of an office space that has classrooms for the Mensch Academy, which is the name of our religious school. But there is a storage room. And in that storage room are dozens and dozens of clear Tupperwares that are all labeled very clearly what's in them, and it's Kiddush cups, Shabbat implements, Sidurim, plates and cups and things like that. And on Friday afternoon at around 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon, a little team of Shabbat coordinators, part-time people who maybe work in theater or art, they have different kinds of jobs that give them the flexibility to come in on Friday and load up our Dodge Caravan that we have taken all the seats out of and load all of the Tupperwares in and take the Tupperwares to wherever we're meeting, unload them, and over the course of the next 4 hours, create Mishkan. And then when the service is over and everybody's done eating and drinking, packing it all up again, strike the set, back in the Mish van, back and unload it, because the next morning we may need it. And it is like a labor of love.
Mish van is such a great name for Mishkan's van. I love that.
Okay. So during the first few years, when it really was just me and my guitar and a handful of people I had found and picked out of the crowd in just the same way Hillel had found and picked me. Right? Ooh, you have a nice voice. Ooh, you sound like you know what you're doing. Um, this was how we built our first davening team. And then asking people, do you have any friends who you think would enjoy this as well? Those people were along for the ride of whatever I wanted to do in a particular moment. So I would think about which songs in which order and where I wanted to put a kavanah, some kind of intention. I would do that, but it's not like I was accountable to anybody. I would just kind of put that together. However, now, the community has grown so much, and we have a davening team of about, 15, 16 people.
We've used the term davening team here in this conversation. It's a group of people who sing the prayers with the leader. How did you and others develop Mishkan's identity and sound?
They're a committed group of people who are committed to the experience of embodied musical harmonious prayer, but they're all coming from very different backgrounds. Some of them are, deeply Jewishly literate, and some would say, like, I can't read a Hebrew letter, and I certainly don't know all of these like Josh Warshawski pieces or Joey Weissenberg pieces or Nava Tehillah pieces or whatever, that you're like throwing at us, and really benefit from, being given a list in advance of like what we're going to do this Friday night. There's always the element of surprise, but what we've found is to help the people in the center of the room feel more settled, confident, prepared. We do now send out, we prepare in advance, write out what we call the pray list, and send out the tunes in advance just so people can get to know them.
Do you rehearse as a davening team, or is it written out SATB? Soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, or bass? Like, is it written with notes? You sing down a third and we're a formal choir, or are people spontaneously singing harmonies?
That's great. That's a great question. This is like the wonky inner workings of davening team stuff. So we have someone, their name is Matthew Ellenwood. They're a composer, conductor, vocal coach, musician. And what we have talked about is that no more than a quarter of the songs that we sing are going to be mapped out precisely with SATB, with parts, because we don't want to lock people into this feeling of being so prepared that there's no room for spontaneity. So it creates some really beautiful moments when you have people hitting, there's da 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 or whatever it is. There are some beautiful, beautiful moments you can create, and some of the music and musicians that we just talked about or that I just named really lend themselves to that kind of preparation. And it's so satisfying in the moment when the davening team like hits that kind of spread and harmony. And the other training element in being part of the davening team is learning how to use your voice and where it wants to live, the zone it wants to live in. So even if you're not giving somebody a part, they know this is my zone and can feel sort of comfortable headed up or headed down and not need to say like, is that okay? Is that my part? Because there aren't parts. We're all singing, but you have a zone that you kind of know that you live in and feels comfortable for you. And so that's like, I feel like it's a level of sophistication on our davening team that we did not have two or 3 years ago, and that we're building in. And I will say it's not without its challenges, because for some people, they're like, I don't know, I always like being part of a team where we just all make it up as we go, and we're all on the kind of crazy ride with you and your spontaneous prayer leadership. And I think what's important is like, that is fun for some people, but it's also incredibly anxiety producing for some people. So trying to hold both.
I remember talking with my friend, the great Rabbi Lauren Henderson, who said something like, before Lachadudi, you stood up on a chair and blessed a couple about to be married. Like, it was just a spur of the moment blessing, or are these individual moments planned? Are they charted out where a kavanah, a mindful thought will go?
Oh my God, I have no idea what she's talking about, but I love that. This is me getting up out of chair. I'm genuinely curious what some of those moments are, because what feels novel, because I think I do feel a sense of freedom to assess, be like, my antenna are up the whole service. My antenna are up for what is the energy moving in the room. And if it feels like people's energy is stuck and we're singing and everybody's sitting down, even if the psalm we're singing isn't one that requires standing, I may say, let's stand, and we get up and right. Like, so my antenna are up looking for those moments to kind of craft and move the energy from wherever it is to a place of greater openness and spaciousness, relaxed presence, all of those things. For the most part, most of what I say and do in a service is actually what you might say is scripted. Like, I've thought about it. But then there are moments, 100%, and I think this is so important, when, like Heschel talked, in his stinging indictment of synagogue prayers, when he says, what's going to happen in a synagogue service. There's, pomp and precision and all the notes are right. And the one thing that's missing is life. The one thing that's missing is a surprise of the soul, a journey, an adventure of the soul. And there are moments when that happens, and it can actually be destabilizing. And it's for those moments when I actually feel like, okay, and now there is an opportunity to say something unscripted, because I could not have planned for this moment. How now do I take the energy that I can feel, for example, after a sermon that people weren't, instead of being confirmed and affirmed by, maybe like unsettled them. How now do we take that energy and help people feel a sense of safety again? Help people feel that they're okay, and that they can have a hard conversation about what they heard here tonight, but they're fundamentally going to be okay. And then, it's important for us all to be pushed and to grow. Sometimes we don't always know when that's going to happen. Sometimes it surprises us, even in a service. But to know, like, we can handle that as a community. So I do feel like there are those spontaneous moments too. And it's very important for anybody leading services to be prepared for the possibility of the adventure of the soul, which, sounds fun, but also, can be hard.
At Mishkan, how's the room arranged so that it feels warm and welcoming and communal?
Right. So we try to arrange the room in something like concentric circles. It doesn't work for every service. It works far less well for a Saturday morning when we're reading Torah. But on a Friday night, if you come in, the room is set up in basically a C shape. And, it's concentric circles. And the reason why it's a C is because obviously, like, there does need to be an aisle for people to be able to come into and come out of. And there are, of course, other aisles at different parts of the letter, of the shape. But I'm situated facing the door, kind of opposite the door. And then there's a davening team, that group of sort of, you would say, like, inner circle singers, mishorarim, people whose job is to uplift the music. Sitting in that inner C. And then around them are the concentric circles of the rest of the community. They have microphones. There's a drummer. Every so often, when we have a different instrumentalist who is comfortable improvising or who knows the tunes well, whether it's a guitar player, a mandolin player, we had a fiddle player for a while. Every now and again, we have a guy who plays melodica, that little tiny keyboard thing that you blow into. Yeah. And so the rest of the community is around the davening team, and it's their energy and modeling that really, kind of sets the tone for the whole room.
Even at Ikar, you've created your own style of music. How did this develop? And is it from the sound you heard as a kid, from your cantor, from the song leader? How do you balance the new sound with the classical sound of 20th century Judaism that people are used to?
Yeah. It's funny. If you had asked me this question 13 years ago, I would have been much more ready to critique the sort of standard cantorial style of synagogue worship that so many people find uninviting. And, it's sort of like, it may be beautiful, but I can't sing along. And I remember back to that, the interview I did at Anshe Emet, where I sat and spoke with their cantor, who's like a, world-renowned cantor who's, now retired. But he said to me, like, I feel like my job is to create one moment of, pure transcendence, pure magic, pure, sort of presence in the room. And I thought, God, that's so funny, because I think, like, that's the opposite of what you do. I was thinking, like, that's my job. I'm the rabbi with the guitar who, like, gets everybody having that moment of transcendence and magic. But, like, the truth is, we both felt that to be our job. We had different ways of doing it. And the truth is, I think people respond differently. Like, not everybody wants happy, clappy guitar, resonant, harmonious. Like, I think a lot of people do want that. But there are some people, for whom what you just described is actually incredibly comforting. Maybe it taps into the nostalgia of their childhood, or, it's a sound that really they love, and that there's nothing like cantorial music. And so I'm always hesitant now to, to be too dismissive of that, even though it is not my personal style. During high holidays in particular, and also during weddings and funerals, I always do take a few moments, where I try to think, where is that style most effective for creating that sense of majesty, where like maybe people don't even want to sing along for Kol Nidre, at least the first time through. Like maybe they want to sit and really like let the sound wash over them,
How do you make Mishkan warm and welcoming? How do people find you? What's it like there?
What my hope and imagination is of what is happening outside in the hallway and, coming down the ramp, is that they first saw a sign outside the building, which of course is not our building. So it's a sign letting you know you're in the right place. Welcome to Mishkan. We're glad you're here. And then you come in and, the sad reality of the times in which we live is you're probably going to see a security guard. Who says Shabbat Shalom or who says good evening, depending on their comfort level. But then hopefully very soon thereafter, you would bump into a Mishkan greeter, a volunteer who says, welcome, good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, come on in. When you come in, there is a name tag table where you can, make your own name tag. For the longest time, we tried to have like builder badges where, if you're a member of the community, you already have a name tag there. And it's in a little box and they're organized alphabetically. But the truth is, every single week after services, this staff I talked to you about earlier, who's, driving the Mish van and setting up and taking down, found themselves detangling hundreds of name tags and then having to re-alphabetize them. And then people, of course, walk away with their name badge. They take it home and then they come back the next week and they look for it in the box and they say, where's my name tag? And we say, I don't know. Did you have it? Oh my God, right. And, or maybe somebody becomes a member and then they come the very next week expecting their name tag to be there. But, we do it in batches, like once a month. So maybe it wouldn't be there right away and people would feel bad. So anyway, we scrap the builder badges and everybody just, when they come in, makes a little name tag that gives them the opportunity to write their name, pronouns. They're little fun stickers, first timer, I'm a board member. Ask me about, and you could, ask me about ice skating, ask me about the election, ask me about whatever. And it gives people a chance to kind of add a little personality to the standard name tag, which I think is fun and people appreciate. Also, kids like putting stickers on things. Maybe adults like putting stickers on things too. And then you grab a siddur and a kippah if you want, or if it's a Shabbat morning, a talis if you want, and you come inside. And yes, we want people to feel that it is available to them. And at the same time, they do not have to feel compelled or forced, to wear something that doesn't feel authentic. And then, for kids at their bar mitzvahs, at their b mitzvahs, we, they get a talis, they get taught how to put it on. It's personal. Same thing with a kippah. And so, yeah, I think for adults, it feels a little more kind of choose your own adventure and choose the Jewish adventure that does feel meaningful and spiritual for you. And I want people to feel like they are taking the next step on their journeys. Just as an example, we have a morning minyan that meets online Monday through Friday, half an hour, 8 a.m. Chicago time. And that has become a place where people have, over the course of, we started it during the pandemic. So in probably 2020. I think we started in 2020 and it's still going, about, somewhere between 20 and 30 people a morning. And people have started laying tefillin. People have gotten themselves talises, just seeing each other on screen doing something and being like, oh, wait, that guy does it. Can I do that? And Rabbi Stephen Philp has done a couple of tutorials of, so you're laying tefillin for the first time. Here's how you do it, and I do think that opportunity for growth, but not telling people they must, makes it It makes it a more comfortable, personal, authentic kind of thing.
How do you bring in Rabbi Schulweis's philosophy into your services?
This past Shabbat, I'm pretty sure I invoked Rabbi Schulweis, although I don't know if I learned this from Rabbi Feinstein, who learned it from Rabbi Schulweis, or just a Rabbi Feinstein thing. But the idea of, you look at this wall of blessings. We bless you, God, for doing this. We bless you, God, for doing that. We bless you, God, for doing this. And some of the blessings, I'm even just talking about, for example, blessings of the morning, Birchot HaShachar, opening the eyes of the blind, putting clothes on our bodies, helping us stand up straight, creating a world where we release captives and free captives. And you look at that, and on a superficial level, you might say, but that's not true. God doesn't make everyone see. There are blind people, and there are people without clothes, and there are people who aren't free. And so if you add 2 words to the end of the prayer, then suddenly it's not about God doing these things. It's about us being moved to do these things. So blessed are you who is manifest, who is manifest throughout the universe, who releases captives through us, who clothes the naked through us, who helps open the eyes of the blind through us, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, you know what? Like, we have no excuse not to be trying to be a little more divine. And at the same time, I am not willing and ready or interested in letting go of the traditional language, that says Baruch Atah Adonai, whether you say Baruch Atah Adonai, Baruch Atiyah Shekhinah, whatever you want to say. But there is a power and a force more powerful than me, which I want to recognize and admit. I don't know why I got blessed with the children I got, I didn't choose them, some force greater than myself and my husband created the, little beings who are now running around with my DNA. That's amazing. There's so many things in this world that are just patently amazing and also devastating that you can't blame on a person or even attribute to a person, And so it's really important to me to retain the possibility of magic and transcendence, as well as also claiming and reclaiming all the places, where we have agency.
Lizzie, this is so nice. I love learning with you.
I love this. It's like Rabbi Shop Talk. It's so fun. God.
So here's a question I want to end with. What's a text you're grappling with or turning to right now?
I want to name a few because, there are some rabbis who they have one text. And I think if I had to pick the one text, it would be the line from Psalm 100, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha. Serve God with joy, But I feel popularized by the song Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, right? And I feel so strongly that Judaism has to be defined by joy in the way that we live it. There are so many other ways to define and describe and live Judaism, but for me, if there's not joy there, I don't know why anybody would do it, So for me, that's essential. That's critical. That's, that's an essential, critical, central piece of my rabbinate. But the text from the Talmud that in which the rabbis argue with each other, and then finally a voice from heaven comes out and says, these and these are words of the living God. Elu ve'elu, divrei Elohim chayim. These and these are the words of the living God, which is to say, hey, people with your very strident opinions that are actually based in fact, and that, and whose facts differ, and therefore, you come out at different conclusions, or maybe your facts are all the same and you're coming out at different conclusions because of the way that you look at the world, because of how you've been shaped, because of all of the divine realities that have, shaped people into different kinds of people. All of you are holding some piece of the truth. And I think that there is an essential and important humility there that, especially in times of intense political polarization, which I don't know if we will ever exit these times because of social media and because of just the cat's been let out of the bag and trains left the station, horses out of the barn. That just might be, the world in which we live. I think it's very important to teach and to practice a kind of spiritual humility, which doesn't mean not having opinions, but it means having opinions and recognizing that your opinions might not be the only legitimate opinions, and existing in a world where we can see gray and where we can speak to people and with people with civility and with respect, even despite very, very different opinions. And then finally, I feel like any of our texts that affirm the sanctity of the human being, right? Like the very first thing we learn about humanity is that it's created in God's image. And that is before, the human race is split into, Jews and non-Jews, before, there are different tribes. And it's just, when there's an original prototype of the human being, and that prototype is in every single human being, and in particular in the human beings who we feel most threatened by and most scared of and most angry at. We have to figure out, how we are going to live in a world where the truth of their humanity is something we can affirm, and the other way around as well, where the truth of our humanity is something that they can affirm. And all of those for me right now are texts that feel very important.
Right. So I guess now the real last thing, is there anything we didn't cover? Anything you want to share at this moment?
All right. Well, first of all, did your team get that whole answer that I gave with the other texts as well? So we started with joy, but then we went into, holding complexity and difference, affirming the humanity of all people. Like Judaism is rich. Judaism is layered. There's a lot in there. And I think there is a time and a place for each kind of thing. And you can't do everything all at once. And I think the idea of simcha shel mitzvah, like the joy of doing a mitzvah, that's an idea that comes out of the Talmud. How should one enter prayer space? They have a whole conversation of, should you be excessively sad or excessively joyful? You shouldn't be talking small talk. You shouldn't be laughing at people. You should, and they say, well, okay, fine. Like if you shouldn't be doing this and that and this and that, which are, emotional distractions, how should you be? And they say simcha shel mitzvah, holding the joy of doing a mitzvah. And I think that when they say joy, they don't mean happy clappy necessarily. I think they mean that deep sense of purposefulness that comes with serving something larger than yourself. And I think that deep sense of purposefulness that is joy, fundamentally that is joy, doesn't necessarily always feel good. It sometimes can feel hard. It sometimes can feel like obligation, like when somebody is sick and you have said that you will be the person on duty to bring food on Tuesday night, but like you have 6 other things going on and it's Tuesday and you weren't expecting, you thought it'd be easy, but actually it's really an imposition on your schedule, but you're going to figure out how to do it anyway. And then the person sends you a note and says, thank you. It really meant a lot to me that you brought me food. And that's simcha shel mitzvah, but it's a different kind than, the kind that you experience in a moment of harmonious unity when all singing the Shema in the middle of a service. So I think that it's important to not try and oversimplify Judaism, based on one bumper sticker, because this is a really rich, layered tradition. And I think one other important thing that I was thinking about as you sent me a couple questions to consider before we started. And one had to do with the difference in, the sort of suburban Jewish experience versus maybe the urban Jewish experience, or, kind of coming back to Schulweis sending Sharon out of his office. And I think right now we are learning the limitations of the American dream, which included, moving to the suburbs, having a lot of space, a lot of privacy, a lot of independence, getting away from the interdependence and kind of life lived on top of each other that city life meant for a lot of people. And what we are realizing now is actually mutual responsibility and taking care of each other is an essential part of human flourishing. Having friends who know what you're up to and who know your life and, that their life and you miss them if you don't see them, that is an essential part of feeling known, feeling valued. Independence is kind of it's a myth. And it's actually a dangerous myth. It's an emotionally and spiritually dangerous myth. And so, that joy, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serving God with joy, is about showing up in all of those places of mutual interdependence that community kind of foists on you if you really put your both feet into community. And I just think we need that more than ever right now. and that doesn't always look like everybody agreeing with everybody, because you're not going to. And there are times when it's going to be messy and hard, because it's going to be, but that is fundamentally that's the deep joy of living a tradition and living in community. I think we can do that.
Thank you for listening to the Moral Courage podcast. We are produced by the Harold M. Schulweis Institute at Valley Beth Shalom, which supports these podcasts in addition to educational programs within Valley Beth Shalom, the Schulweis Library, changing exhibitions at the Liner Chapel at VBS, Jewish World Watch, and the Jewish Community Children's Choir. The Moral Courage podcast is hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach. Our consulting producer is Esther Kostanowitz. Our technical producer is Eric Weiser. We are grateful for the support of the Institute and Haley Lazitsky Weiser at SADCON Productions. To learn more about Rabbi Schulweis or to make a donation to help support these podcasts, visit the Institute website at hmsi.info.